Let me start with a sentence that might sound uncomfortable. Most organizations genuinely believe that they understand their customers, and most of them are wrong. Not because they are careless or they don't do research or they don't care, but because something quietly gets lost between the customer and the organization. Today, I want to explore how that happens, how organizations comes to believe that their customers and what slowly disappears in that translation. Hello and welcome. I'm Sanghamitra, and you are listening to the Strategy Spark podcast, where I talk about a lot of topics related to product, leadership, domains like financial services, AI, and leadership. And let's get started now. Coming back to the topic, organizations don't, wake up one day and decide to misunderstand their customers. They actually do the opposite. Yeah, sure. They run surveys, they track metrics, they create personas, they interview users, and they build dashboards. And at some point, something subtle happens. They stop saying, here's what we are learning, and rather they start saying, well, we know our customers. This kind of behavior doesn't comes out of ego or anything or any politics or anything. It is a subtle shift which you see in product development teams where they have been building the same type of product in the same domain, for example, for a very long time. And yes, they understand their customers or the customer segment for a very long time as well. But there are external factors like macroeconomics, microeconomics, which could, including a lot of other things, which could affect that segment. And our traditional approach might not work with the current market, dynamics. So if the product team is really saying that we know our customers and we don't want to invest in research after, again, building a different version of the same product after 2 years or 3 years, this shift from learning to knowing is actually where the trouble begins. Because their confidence is comforting and uncertainty is exhausting, right? And organizations are very good at choosing comfort. So as the companies grows, customers slowly stops being people. What they become is segments, cohorts, funnels, conversion rates, personas with a lot of interesting photographs. And none of them is actually wrong. By the way, I'm not saying that. Abstractions are very, very necessary when you're doing the research phase of the products. But the risk is the abstraction slowly replaces the actual human. You don't talk to human. You are talking to a segment and understand, not talking per se, but you are trying to analyze a segment, actually not talking to a human being. And team starts optimizing for the model, not the person. And the model is always cleaner, more rational, and more predictable than a real human behavior. Real customers contradict themselves, and dashboards, on the other hand, they don't contradict. So another thing which might happen as organizations scale, decision makers move further away from the actual customers, and product decisions gets filtered through research summaries, slide decks, Jira tickets, OKRs, quarterly reviews, and stuff like that. And by the time insight reaches the leadership, it's already been simplified, it's sanitized, and stripped of all emotional context. No one is lying. I'm not saying that. No one is lying, no one is malicious, but the messy truth doesn't survive the journey. So what leaders often know isn't the customer, it's the organization's version of its customer. Yeah. And here's where things might get very interesting. The more data an organization has, the more confident it feels But data doesn't equal understanding. More data is not equal to value, okay? Data can tell you what has happened, but it cannot tell you, or maybe rarely tells you, why did it happen. And it almost never tells you what the customer felt while it was happening. So yet over time, numbers starts to feel like facts, and fact starts to feel like truth. And this is how teams can be surrounded by insights and still be surprised when the customers behave very differently from what they anticipated. So, what actually gets lost as insight travels through an organization? Very small things, but very important ones, like the tone, the hesitation, the emotion, context, contradictions. The reasons customers do things they themselves really cannot fully explain to you. What survives the system is what fits nearly into slides and metrics. What gets lost in the human messiness is the part that actually matters when you are building products. So, and that's how organizations don't lose customers, they basically lose contact with them. So maybe the goal isn't to know, quote unquote, know customers at all. Maybe it's to stay slightly unsure, okay? To keep listening instead of concluding, to treat your customers' understanding as something very provisional and not permanent. It can change. People do change. That is human behavior, right? So, because the moment an organization says, we know our customers very well, that usually is the moment it stops hearing them very clearly. That's the reflection I wanted to leave you with today. This was a spark short from the Strategy Spark podcast, a short pause to question something we usually take for granted. If this episode made you think how confidently we say, quote unquote, customer centric, I hope you will listen, reflect, and continue the conversation. Please like and subscribe to this channel so that it grows. And thank you for tuning in.